Hi, everyone. This is the GitLab Pods CEO sync, and I have the first point. But before I go in, thanks everyone for doing some of the pre-reading and pre-watching. I hope that makes this meeting more efficient. The first point is since we spoke last, we actually finished some of the cleanup operations following decomposition of the database. And we now dropped all of the unnecessary tables in the CI cluster and in the main cluster respectively, reducing the amount of data very significantly. So that's nice and complete in production. This was mainly driven by Omar and executed by Omar and Rafa. So thanks for doing that. So it's a nice thing to conclude.
Yes, for sure. Congrats, everyone.
Awesome. All right, and on the second one, we haven't spoken in some time, so I'm going to try and provide sort of an overview of the main things for pods. So the first thing is we have defined the first architecture blueprint for pods. I think the thing that we probably want to discuss today maybe most is the iteration 0. You can check out the blueprint. It's already in the docs. And since I asked you to read this, we've also added a few more visuals to it to make it easier to understand the terms. But we felt that it would be easiest to define terminology so that we know what we're talking about and go from there. I'll pause here if there are any immediate questions. Cool. Doesn't appear to be the case right now. The next thing is, based on the blueprint for pods, we defined a proposal for a stateless router. So this is one of the sort of key things that need to be figured out in the pod architecture, is how to route requests to the correct pod, because now users have access to organizations and top-level namespaces that are located in different places, and we need to figure out how to make that happen. And Dylan defined a proposal here. And then based on both the blueprint and the stateless router proposal, Camille actually implemented a proof of concept that kind of shows how something like that could work at GitLab already. I don't know if you want to say anything in particular here, Camille.
I'm pasting a link to what is actually implemented in a POC. It's not exactly that. It's more like this is how it resembles the behavior, which is like the set of the cluster, the compose tables with users, as you, Steve, asked, is like shared across all pods. So this is like part of the shared context, but organization-specific data are local to a pod. And at least in the blueprint that we consider that one of the things that I noticed like in the past was that like we as a GitLab, as an organization, we wanted to control some aspects of the user profiles. So in this model, let's say that a way to authenticate would be global, but for example, what would be shown under your profile would be local to organization that you are within. So like a role being used, or like some kind of verify stamp or something different. I think like it's maybe conceptually similar to a Discord model where you have many servers, you have some aspects configured authentication globally, but your username, maybe not specifically username in context of GitLab, but some personalizations for the profile are local to a given server / organization in our term. And as for the POC, this is like under your point E, this is how what POC kind of models with these shared tables. It has like some implications that cluster-wide stuff is being writable everywhere, but I'm also exploring a more permissive architecture that writes to cluster are asynchronous. So probably more like a region aware, because the pod by default always would work on top of replica And this is another thing that I'm exploring async writes. Steve, does it answer your question?
I think it answers maybe, I guess, the technical implementation, like the thoughts around the question. And thank you for that. And also I did want to say thank you for the video. That was so helpful for this. I'm gonna watch it again because I know I only probably absorbed 50% of it, but thank you for that. I think maybe the question here is more around just I can see what this enables, but one of the things that pods overall, certainly, I think the thought was it also enables us to do from the kind of customer presentation or delivery standpoint is to offer things like data locality, just within certain regions and everything. And so I don't want to add, I know we don't want to have all of the constraints in an MVC to begin with, but I'm just curious, is our thought that, we will kind of cross that bridge when we get to it? Like we'll when we want to add that in there, we'll figure out how to deal with the fact that user information is currently stored around. Maybe we'll add some features to restrict that. Is that the current thought right now, or is there something I'm missing as far as the user information being global?
Fabian, correct me if I'm wrong, but like we don't have like a firm answer like to your question right now. What constitutes like user data locality? So far, we kind of look at projects and groups being like the key information, but this model doesn't prevent us from saying that most of the user profile is local to organization, but things that are required to authenticate, maybe like your username and your email, and maybe your some two-factor authentication token, they are global because of that model. So I think like it's more like a legal question / product question, what we actually want to achieve, because I don't think that it forbids us from saying that maybe user-sensitive information, like my first name, last name, location, and things like that, they may be local to a specific region, whereas like this authentication information may be global. So I think one versus another doesn't contradict, but we don't have clear answer for this question right now.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Yeah.
Fabian, do you want to add something?
Sid, we can't hear you.
About that, I'm not sure it's right, but I have a strong opinion, loosely held, on this. I think that having user information is a really like broad thing, so we should kind of split it up. Like what I did on the instance and which projects I interacted with, which messages I got, that needs to be local to the pod. Like you cannot have that in a shared state. The kind of the username, we need to prevent conflicts between them, so it makes sense to have them on a global level. And then the authentication information, I think it would be helpful to have that on the global level, because the global level is going to have a way smaller attack surface area. If you look at the amount of functionality on the global level is going to be 1% of whatever else is in what is then the functionality that is in a pod. The pod will do all the interesting things. So you want to make sure that for zero trust, you want to make sure that you make that put that very sensitive authentication in something that doesn't have a big surface area.
Yeah, my 2 cents is Camila's mostly right. We haven't done the specific research. I think that my gut feeling is that if we have a very clearly defined set of data that is global and we have good reasons for them, we can control this, then I think that's fine. GitLab.com is already GDPR compliant and we store our user data. We just need to make sure that we can do that. I think data locality and where people's code resides and those things is pretty key. And if we can say this is all local in the pod, and the pod is in this specific country or legal legislation, the EU, I think that may already cover 90+% of the use cases. And I think that may be good enough. But we would have to validate that before we do it. Cool. Does that answer your question, Steve?
It does. Yeah. Thank you for all the additional context on it, all of you.
That's the next one, Sid. You're muted again.
Oh, sorry. So we're at 2D, right? Or
I think we mostly jumped to E, but we skipped D. So
we
D is
skipped
correct.
D. That's not good. That's the compliment. I think it's a really impressive proposal, and I love that. There's a proof of concept. So great work. I'm really impressed. Not sure I understand everything, but it seems at the same time both a boring solution and to be quite complicated, which is an interesting combination. But these things are complicated. To F, how is this the same and maybe different from kind of the Shopify model we used as an inspiration at the beginning? The article has few details, so it could just be, well, it's similar as far as we know, but we don't know the technical details of that proposal. Camille?
I think it's hard to answer that like very concretely, because Shopify is by definition more like working in the isolation between.
Yeah.
But I really heard like various different solutions, like basically like the solution that we took, and something like to consider as well is like that each set of the pod infrastructure is specifically designed to handle that specific part of the infrastructure. Whereas in some of the solutions, you could consider that, like your web fleet of the Puma servers can process requests for any pod as long as it knows which pod to process. So you have more like flexible and scalable infrastructure, where you kind of assume that you maybe still have like this like sorting hat routing layer at the top, but as long as you send an indicator to a pod, as long as you send an indicator to a flexible web fleet with Puma saying, hey, serve me this from the pod 1, it's gonna happily connect to the given database, given object storage, Redis, whatever, and serve from that. So if there is like a spike in the usage on this given pod, it's handled by the general purpose fleet on which you kind of switch on the application side. And this is, I think, what they kind of show with this, with shard data, or like this kind of a way to indicate, hey, just fetch this data from this particular shard. So I think this is probably the main reason. Like in the diagram that we showed, like this block diagram, we assume that each pod has its own set of the infrastructure elements. It's completely separate. It scales on its own up to the limits that we define, instead of saying that we maybe have many object storage, many Postgres, many Redis, and we just have a single Kubernetes autoscaler and make each pod, make each of the Puma to switch dynamically between them. So I think this is probably like the main difference at this moment. You are muted, or we cannot hear you.
Some of that went over my head. Can someone kind of recap that?
Yeah, I think the summary is we isolate in our proposal all parts that make GitLab run, including, for example, web nodes like Puma, but you could also define a global fleet of those web things and they just route to any given pod. And that may be, for example, for performance reasons or for cost reasons. So you don't have to have all of the components isolated, but right now we do that. Some stateless services may not need to be that way.
Yeah, but I'm very supportive of that because it means we can also have all the data in a certain region. And it also means if someone finds a vulnerability but doesn't have access to those projects, they cannot take out our entire web application fleet and things like that. So cool.
So
Thanks.
like the simplest way to think that like you pick like out of the pod a web Puma and you move that on the top, basically. This is like the simplest way to think that about that. The same you take for the site, you kind of put that on the layer right below like a routing instead of this being in the context of a pod.
Yep, cool. I'm glad we're not doing that. And thanks for that. Thanks, Camille. Thanks, Fabian. Stan, 2G.
Yeah, great work, by the way. Want to echo that. I had a question about the diagram and the pod, the cluster diagram there on the cluster global part of the diagram. It says we have a global Redis, and I was curious to hear more about why we have that. I can understand having a cluster-wide interface, but I'm just curious about the Redis part.
I specifically named user sessions because I don't think that we have like the specific usage pattern for Redis today. This would be primarily to cache, to share like your user session cookie across all pods, so you can seamlessly authenticate to whatever routed pod you connect without having to re-authenticate. If you take a look, there is like a Redis with all of the other stuff like a cache, which is like a local to a pod. But since like our means of like sharing session is through Redis, not database, this is why sharing Redis for user sessions.
So does that mean all the pods have to connect to that one Redis cluster?
Like for user sessions only. So like you being authenticated can be actually quickly fetched to whatever you connect in anywhere on a given pod. That's really like the primary reason for this shared component. So think about that, like you go to gitlab.com/gitlab.org, which is like on the pod 100, but then like you just go to gitlab.com/mypersonal, which is on pod 1. You don't have to re-authenticate because you already authenticate against the cluster. The actual authorization to access given resource, like a project members, project authorizations database table, is stored locally on this pod. But since you are authenticated, you don't have to authenticate. The operation is then authorized locally on a pod.
Okay, I'll have to talk to you more about that in detail, but I think I generally see you're saying there's some global session state that you want to preserve. Is there a pod specific session state? Because for example, we store stuff in the session data that may be like, GDPR issue or something like that. Would that still go in the global cluster then?
Like Stan, let's talk about it. I cannot answer this question right now.
Okay.
I just assume that this would be like one of the requirements to share some aspect about user being authenticated. I did not look deep into what is in that. It may be exactly as you say that some of the data will be local to a pod, but like general, you being authenticated may be shared. So I cannot answer you that in more detail right now. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I have the next one. It's just something that came out of us discussing the pods proposal. I think one thing that is pretty central is that we say, look, we can group top-level namespaces into organizations, and users care mostly about those top-level namespaces inside their org. They don't care about other things. And that allows us to say, okay, we can put these things onto pods. They don't need to interact across different pods, and that makes this entire architecture viable. Here's an illustration of this. And most organizations that are on gitlab.com already just have a single top-level namespace. But some have multiples. GitLab is an example of that. We allow people to have more. So that's sort of a central thing that underpins the proposal from how GitLab operates. And in my view, this brings GitLab a little bit closer to a situation where we have a global user account. People can interact with multiple organizations with a single user account, a little bit similar to Discord. And I think that's actually an improvement. That's my personal opinion, but it also means we can do pods and we have clear boundaries. But I was wondering what people think.
I think the proposed definition of an organization is much more clear than the definition that I've seen or my understanding of the workspaces concept. I also think that it's a lot, it meets people's expectations, and so it's easier to communicate. But I don't think that we need both a top level organization and the concept of workspaces. But yeah, that's all to say. I like the organization direction.
Yeah, thanks for this. I will sync with the workspaces folks again. My current understanding is that workspaces will be the next iteration of top level namespaces and bring a lot of admin features to that. But I also have to follow up a little bit because I agree with you that if workspaces do something similar, then we have to make sure we're aligned.
I can't wait for all the autocomplete dropdowns to be scoped to the GitLab organization.
Yeah, I mean, these kinds of things, they make a ton of sense to me. I feel they would make the overall user experience significantly better. And I think they also align with how organizations think about, you know, their interactions with GitLab. And that's what they would also get if they were on a self-managed instance. Mm-hmm. So I think that makes sense to me. Josh, you have the next one.
Oh, I think enterprises will appreciate the further isolation. I think we've been making a lot of nips and tucks around the current model, but it's going to be a lot of sort of small fixes there. And having something more like this, I think they would find a lot of value. We'll have to, of course, do a lot of validation and diligence here before we would even consider it. But I think gut feel is that they would appreciate it. And it might simplify a lot of the other work that we're trying to do to sort of provide isolation on each and every little feature as opposed to a more holistic approach. But it also will simplify pods. But yeah, like, I mean, if you're trying to add someone to a group, but trying to add David DeSanto to a group is nearly impossible. You have to type in his email address.
Yeah. You added a comment, Sid. You want to vocalize that?
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around a few things. I thought it was workspace, not workspaces, first of all.
As in, someone would have a single workspace.
Yep, and that contained all their things. And I'd love for maybe a Josh or something to kind of get me up to speed in how this, with pods, we're now talking about organizations. With the workspace thing, we're talking about workspace something. And I think in billing and fulfillment, we also want to aggregate multiple instances into one account or something like that. So I think there's at least three pieces of the organization trying to do the same thing. So I'd love for them to cross-reference each other.
Yeah, that's definitely a next step. For us, I'm already working to get an understanding of it. And once we are aligned, we can certainly brief you on it as well.
I think it works a little bit different, where first we just call out that these three things should probably align, and then we try to get them to align. So I think step one is on the pods page, actually call these things out with links and have links from those projects to this. And so first add the links and then start the conversation, not the other way around.
Yeah, there's already one link in the proposal from top-level namespaces to workspaces, but I'll make that more explicit.
Cool. I missed that. Thanks for that. And then maybe Josh can have a quick look of whether there should be a link to the fulfillment project, what they're working on.
Great. We are actually at time. I think folks can read the next steps. Is there any other thing that we need to discuss before closing? Awesome. Then thanks everyone for attending, and see you at the next one.
Thanks so much.